We are starting a new sermon series this week. I had the name last week. I didn't have a clue what I was preaching. And so the sermon series is entitled Cold Case. I don't know if any of you have watched any crime documentaries. There was one called Cold Case. I can't say I've ever seen an episode of it, honestly. I might have at one point in time. But I love watching those crime documentaries. And they don't just show you the crime. They go back and they show you the life, and what led up to the crime. And sometimes, especially the Netflix ones, they take you on some twists and some turns. And they tell you some things that you never would have thought were going to happen. There's several of those like that where my jaw just drops watching them. I'm like, whoa, people are really that mean, or people are really that stupid, or whatever the emotion is, you see all of that. Well, I thought, why not look at what led up to the crucifixion of Jesus? And so that's what this sermon series is about, Cold Case. We're going to look at 5 different events. We'll look at one each week and finish this sermon series off on Easter Sunday. 5 different events that led up to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And so the next 5 Sundays, today and the next 4, we're going to look at those events. As we go through this series, I want you to think about this. What would you do if you knew that you only had weeks to live? What would you do? You're healthy, you're not like bedridden, you're not on hospice, you're healthy, but you know that you're going to pass in so many weeks. Let's say 3 weeks. What would you do during that time? For everybody, the answer would be different. Maybe, if you've always been afraid of jumping out of an airplane, maybe you'd go skydiving because you don't have that fear anymore. All it's going to do is speed up your death, right? You know you're going to die in 3 weeks anyway. So maybe you would go skydiving. Maybe you would visit with your family, spend the whole 3 weeks with your family. Maybe you would visit some place that you have never been before, that you always wanted to go. I don't know what it is that you would do, but what I do know is that it probably would be significant. It wouldn't be, well, man, I've really got to make sure that I get my toenails clipped. I mean, really got to make sure. No, you're not going to care about your toenails. You're going to die in 3 weeks. You're not going to spend 2 minutes cutting your toenails. Really got to make sure I finish my season on Madden, the video game. I got to finish that. You're not going to care about that. It's insignificant. You're going to be focusing on the most significant things in your life for those 3 weeks. During the events that we're going to look at over the next 5 Sundays, Jesus knew He was headed to the cross. He knew it. We're going to see today, He knew what would result from His actions. And so these 5 events, there are more, but these 5 events are 5 of the things that Jesus considered the most important things to do in the last few weeks of His life. These events help shape our understanding of what Jesus went through and what He deemed was important. Just like our last series where we looked at the 7 letters to the 7 churches. Jesus told us what He found important to a church. His actions and His words show us what He thought was important when He only had a few weeks left to live. And these events paved the road to the cross. These are the events that led to the death of Jesus of Nazareth. And with each event, we gain a deeper appreciation for what Jesus went through and for what Jesus did for us to give us salvation. First event we're going to look at is in John chapter 11. This message is going to be a little bit different today because I'm reading a whole lot of Scripture. I've actually preached a whole sermon series on this. If you want more in-depth teaching on this, go way back to like September 2019, August, July. I preached a whole series on this passage. You're going to find that it's not even on YouTube. You're going to have to go to Facebook and scroll all the way back, and it's not going to be on the nice quality video package we give you today. It's going to be on an iPhone parked right about here or here. But I preached on this whole series, and I preached on this passage in a whole series. Today we're going to cover it in just one message. So we're going to move fast through this text, but it's important because the cold case begins with the death of Lazarus. Start with verse 1. John 11, verse 1. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. So you have Mary, you have Martha, you have Lazarus. Those are the three people that are the main people in this. They are very, very close friends with Jesus. Jesus stays in their home at times. They are close friends. Jesus loved them, and it's clear. The passage says that he loved them. Yet here they are, and they're experiencing sickness, they're experiencing sorrow, and they're eventually going to experience death. Jesus knew what they were going through, but it didn't stop them from going through it. And we as Christians are not immune to trials and troubles in our lives. We see that here. He was there for them, but they still went through all this. Verse 4, but when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Underline that in your Bible if you write in your Bible. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. How many of you know when Jesus gives a spoiler alert, it's going to come to pass? And he's telling us what's going to happen in this story. He says, this illness does not lead to death. The very voice that spoke the universe into existence tells us this illness will not lead to death. And so we ought to believe that. Because when God speaks, things happen. He says that this is going to lead to the glory of God. God in the flesh has spoken, and when God speaks, things happen. And we're going to see that here. When God speaks, it's finished, it's complete. What He says is going to come to pass, and we'll see that. Verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Very clear there, right? That He loved them. It says it. So when He heard that Lazarus was ill, He stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Well, that seems a little weird. He knew he was sick, but He said, we'll go in a couple days. If He knew he was ill, why did He stay 2 days longer before He left? He could have healed him instead of raising him from the dead. He could have spoke a word. We saw that with the centurion's daughter. Remember, he says, you don't need to come back. Just speak the word and she'll be healed. And he spoke it, and it was long distance healing. But it was free long distance. We didn't even have to pay for it back in those days, right? And so Jesus could have just said, Lazarus, be healed. Why did he wait 2 days? It's because the timing and the purpose of God is always different than our timing and our purpose. And God had a different plan for Lazarus. Jesus had healed the sick before. Jesus had resuscitated the dead. You say, what do you mean resuscitate? You resuscitate somebody when they've not been dead very long. You raise the dead when they've been dead quite some time. People get resuscitated from the dead all the time. It happens in the hospitals. The nurses start doing CPR or whatever. People come back to life. And so that happens pretty frequently. Jesus had done that. Jesus had not raised somebody 4 days in the grave. He had a different purpose and he had a different plan. Mary and Martha had a plan for healing. Jesus had a plan for a resurrection. They saw a tragedy when Lazarus passes in just a couple of verses. Jesus saw an opportunity to show off His power and His glory in an awesome and mighty way. When we ask God to do something in our lives, and we ask for a very specific thing, and He doesn't do it exactly like we asked, sometimes that leads to disbelief. Sometimes that leads to an unbelief even. Sometimes that can lead to us getting discouraged or angry or upset with God. But it wasn't that God didn't care about their situation. God did care about their situation. We'll see so much that Jesus wept over their situation in just a few minutes. He cared about Mary and Martha. He loved Mary and Martha. He loved Lazarus. But He loved them so much that He wanted to bring them to a new closeness and a new trust in Him. And so He allowed Lazarus to die. He waited 2 days. And then He started towards Bethany. He loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus so much that He wanted them to have a much better understanding of His power than they'd ever had before. Verse 7 said, "Then after this He said to His disciples, 'Let us go to Judea again.' The disciples said to Him, 'Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again?'" What they're talking about took place at the end of chapter 10. If you look back at chapter 10, you'll see Jesus had said, among many other words, He said, "I and the Father are one." So what's He saying? I'm God. I'm the Messiah. And when He says that in verse 30, verse 31 says that they picked up stones and they were going to stone Him. And there's some more conversation that takes place between Jesus and these people who are trying to stone Him. And then verse 39 says this, "Then they sought to arrest Jesus, but He escaped from their hands." Wasn't the first time people had tried to stone Him. That happened before, and He walked right through the people and was able to escape. That's what you see here. All that took place in Jerusalem. Jesus then left Jerusalem. He went back across the Jordan. He started doing things somewhere that was far away from Jerusalem. Why? Because they're trying to stone Him. They're trying to arrest Him. So what is He doing? He's going out into the wilderness so that doesn't happen. For the sake of time, skip down to verse 14. "Then Jesus told them plainly, 'Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him.'" So He knows Lazarus is dead. Verse 16 says, "So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, 'Let us also go, that we may die with him.'" Good old Thomas. I can't let that part go past because I don't like the ESV translation there. If your Bible says Thomas called Didymus, I love that translation because Didymus is just a cool word to say. Didymus. I love to say it. I miss the translation. That's the Greek translation that means twin. And so his name was Thomas, or what they called him was Thomas Didymus. Good old Tommy Didymus. His friends called him T. Diddy. Some of you got that. We're going to come back to him in just a minute, though. Verse 17 says, "Now when Jesus came, He found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days." Now that's significant. You read that, and with our understanding, we don't think that's very significant. We're like, man, 4 days, that's quite some time. They probably hadn't buried him yet. Well, they would have, because they would have buried him that day. And so it's different culture, right? 4 days now, it's like, well, that's no big deal. They're probably waiting for the family to come in from Chicago or New York or something. It's different in those days. And 4 days is very significant to the Jews. Remember, you read the Bible, understanding what they understood at the time, not applying our modern life to that. The Jews believed that the spirit left the body on the third day. And so to them, the first day, the second day, the third day, the spirit's floating around up here trying to get back into the body. But on that fourth day, nobody can last longer than 3 days, right? Trying to get back into a body. And so on the fourth day, that spirit is gone. And that's what the Jews believed. Not only is Lazarus dead in their mind, his spirit has also departed. So all chance is gone. All that's left behind is just an empty shell. Jesus is about to do something amazing, and most of us know what he's about to do, but he's about to bring a soul and a life back into a body that's been dead for 4 days. This is going to prove to a whole lot of people that he's the Messiah. Not everybody, but a whole lot of people are going to believe this. Because Lazarus had died, the word says many Jews had come to the house of Mary and Martha, just like we do today, right? Somebody dies, we rally around them, and we take them food, we go visit them, we make sure they're... That's what was going on here. It's a little different in that time because they had wailers and all kind, not like people like in Moby Dick, but they had professional criers, basically, who would go to the homes and wail as loud as they could, because the louder you wailed, the more you mourning. You had all that going on. All these people are there, and there's an opportunity now for Jesus to do something awesome. If he'd healed him, only Mary and Martha and Lazarus would have known. But since he's gone and there are all these people here, now there's an opportunity for a very public miracle. From God's perspective, this is the way that's going to happen, that's going to bring more people into his kingdom. Jesus had healed tons of people. He'd resuscitated people, but he'd never resurrected somebody whose spirit had left the body as they believed. Now, does that really happen? Well, that's how they believed, though. Catch that. It was God's plan all along to resurrect Lazarus. Look at verse 18. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. And many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. Those two verses, I talk all the time about verses you just kind of gloss over because it's just, background information. Those two verses tell us a whole lot about the love Jesus has for us. Because what just happened to him in Jerusalem? They just tried to stone him. They just tried to arrest him. And yet he's going now because he loves Mary and Martha and Lazarus so much, he's going to within 2 miles of where they just tried to stone him and kill him. And he's going to a place he knows there's going to be a whole lot of people there. He knows that the chances that he's going to get captured or executed is going to happen. That the disciples know it too. That's why Thomas, T. Diddy, says, "Let us also go, so that we may die with him." And Thomas gets a lot of flack, doesn't he? Doubting Thomas. But in that moment, that's a very brave thing for Thomas to say. Let's go. If he's going to die, we're going to die. And it takes some boldness and some courage to actually stand up and go. Now we see later that when it actually happens, that courage leaves him. But it takes a lot of courage to even start on a path sometimes that God has set in place. not only is he close, there's going to be all these people here. Jesus is willing to put all that on the line to work a miracle in these people's lives and to put his glory on display in a way that he's never shown before. He's willing to go 2 miles from where they just tried to kill him to put more people into his kingdom. Some people complain about a song we sing. I see it on Facebook all the time, even though the song's like 5 years old now. But there's a song called Reckless Love, and I just saw last week somebody that was complaining, well, I don't like that song because God's love's not reckless. God doesn't do anything reckless. He always has a plan. He always has a purpose. Well, that's not what it's talking about. This is what it's talking about. God loves us so much. It's not that He's willing, it's not that He doesn't have a plan. He had a plan. He knew that. But He loves us so much that He's willing to walk into a situation that will even lead to His death to help us in our time of need, to comfort us, to work a miracle when things look very bleak. That's the God that we serve. Those 2 little verses say a whole lot about God's love for us. He is the God who risks His own life to come back to Jerusalem because people need Him. He knew. He knew it was going to cost Him His life. But He did it anyway. Verse 20 says, "So when Martha heard Jesus was coming, she went and met Him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.' Even when things looked bleak, even when things looked hopeless, even when she thought Jesus couldn't do a single thing for her situation, what did she still call Him? Lord. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." She's mad at God. She's disappointed that Jesus didn't come and heal Lazarus. She's disappointed her brother died, but she's still calling Him Lord even in the midst of her anger and disappointment. Her faith never falters. Her will wasn't lining up with God's will. Her ideas weren't lining up with God's ideas, but she's still saying, "You're on the throne and I still trust you. You are still Lord in my life." She wasn't questioning her faith, that despite her anger, despite her disappointment, despite her grief, her faith remained in Jesus. She still calls Him Lord. Verse 22 says, "But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." So she says, "Lord, if you would have just been here, but even now, even though things look bleak, whatever you ask from God, God's going to give you." And Jesus said in verse 23, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to Him, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" We sometimes get so focused on what God's going to do for us in the future that we forget about what He can do for us right now. The kingdom of heaven is described as not yet right now. And so there's some that's not yet fulfilled. Jesus is going to come back. Jesus is going to set up His throne. But the kingdom of God is also right now. And you have some benefits available to you. You have some love from the Savior that comes. You have peace that passes all understanding right now. And you can live your life to a very full extent here on the earth. You may not have heaven like we're going to have there. Nothing can be that good. But you can have a pretty good life right here if you trust in God. And that's what's going on here. She says, I know He'll rise in the future. Jesus says, forget the future. We're not talking about the future. Do you believe I can turn this funeral party into a resurrection party? Do you believe that? And He asks her that question. And sometimes all it takes for God to do something awesome in our life is just a simple declaration of faith. Sometimes we make that declaration of faith and God takes us farther than we ever thought we would go. We've all experienced that in life. A simple declaration of faith. We had one right here at this church when I became the pastor. I thought, Carl Junction? I was interviewing to upgrade my credentials. I wasn't going in for a church interview. And our presbyter says, have you ever thought about going to Carl Junction? And I said, no. I live there. My mom used to go to church there. He said, I'd like for you to go and attend. I could have said, not a chance. No, I'm too busy. I work full time. You know, I'm a youth pastor. That's great. You don't have to get ready to preach to a youth group, right? You can just, they don't know the difference in the Bible. You can just say anything you want, right? No, I'm kidding. I'm exaggerating just a little bit. But I don't have to study to preach to youth as much as I have to study to preach to adults, because adults will say, you're flat wrong about that. Here's what the Word says. Kids don't do that. It's great. I was happy. Well, there were times when I weren't happy when our youth group was like 3, but at that time we had a good-sized youth group, good times going. No, God says, do you believe you can be a pastor? I guess so, God. And I took that step of faith. And that's what you have to do. And sometimes He can take that so much farther. Do you believe I can do it? He says, take that step then. Sometimes we got to take a little step out of our pew up to the altar to get prayed for. Sometimes we have to take a little step of faith when we don't have the money to give a little bit to a cause. Sometimes we have to take a step of faith to love somebody even, right? Because we feel like all our love's given out. I can't love anybody else. That person's really hard to love. And we have to take a step of faith and reach out to that person and let God give us that love for them. It takes a step of faith. He said, do you believe that? Verse 27, she said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. Ooh, that's not a good thing for Jesus right then. It's true, but they just tried to stone Him for that. They just tried to arrest Him for saying that. And Jesus doesn't deny it, but people are now starting to call Him the Christ. And a lot of people are about to watch Him perform this miracle and believe it. Verse 28, when she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and calling for you. That's a big statement, right? The teacher is here and He's calling for you. Jesus says, I know Mary's hurting. I know she's staying back because she's in a lot of grief. I know she's in pain. I know she thinks that numbness in her heart will never end. But she may not know what she needs, but I know what she needs. Have her come to me, because I'm the one that can end that pain. I'm the one that can end that numbness. She needs to come to me. Bring her to me. I want to fix her. I want to do something awesome in her life. In our deepest and darkest moments, in our lowest points in life, Jesus is calling us to Him. He wants us to come to Him. If we feel like we have no faith left even, He wants us to bring it to Him so He can give us peace and He can give us comfort. Verse 29 says, when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. So they think she's going to the tomb. They're like, we better go weep with her. We gotta put on this show, wail, and cry at the top of our lungs. They go with her. It says, now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's it. That's all she says. It's all that's listed that she says. We need to compare Mary's statement and Martha's statement for just a minute. Martha's statement is very similar to Mary's statement. She said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But then she says something else. She says, but even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, He will give you. Mary doesn't say the second part, does she? She says, if you'd have been here, he wouldn't have died. She's falling at the feet of Jesus. She's calling him Lord. But instead of believing that he can help in her situation, instead of looking to the present, she focuses on the past and she says, Lord, if you would have been here, Lord, you could have healed him. Lord, you could have. You should have. Lord, you would have. It's that could have, should have, would have mentality. If I could go back and do this, my life would be better. If I could go back and do this, my life wouldn't have went this way. If I could go back and change this moment, my life would have been a whole lot better. How many of you know God's not going to go back and change a moment, but God can do something in your life right now in the present that can change your life for the future? And that's what we see here. She's going through the motions, but there's a problem because when the rubber meets the road, her faith is not big enough to believe that Jesus can change her situation. It's been 4 days. His spirit is gone. Verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Read that last part. Greatly troubled. Why is he troubled? Because both Mary and the Jews are weeping and wailing at the top of their lungs. They're ugly crying is what it is. And so she's weeping just like the enemies of Jesus are. She's weeping like there is absolutely zero hope for Jesus to intervene in her situation. She's putting into words what the Jews are thinking. If he would have been here, this wouldn't have happened, but he wasn't. And so there's nothing that he can do now. They didn't believe the words that Jesus spoke back in verse 4. This sickness is not unto death. They didn't believe that. Jesus is agitated with the lack of belief that they're showing. That's why he's greatly troubled. After 3 years of constant teaching, after 3 years of telling them that he is going to the cross, they don't believe he can raise somebody who's been in the grave 4 days. There's an unbelief in it, and it distresses him. Even though he had resuscitated 2 others, nobody had ever raised somebody who's been dead 4 days. And so what good is Jesus? If he'd only come sooner, maybe Lazarus would have been here. If he'd only been here on the first day, maybe he could have resuscitated him. But now there's nothing that he can do. That's their mentality, and Jesus is distressed with that. He sees Mary, he sees the Jews wailing, and he's distressed with their unbelief. Verse 34 says, and he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Verse 35, shortest verse in the Bible. If you ever have a trivia question, this is it. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" Now the word wept is different from what we just saw. When we read about Mary and Martha weeping, the Greek word is different. It doesn't translate in English sometimes. So we're like, well, they're agitated. Jesus is agitated with them, but then he's weeping himself. There's a difference here. The word for weeping used for the Jews and Martha is Mary is completely different than what Jesus is doing. The word used for Mary's crying is like I said a minute, ugly crying, wailing, oh, I can't believe he's gone. Jesus is just tears. It's just a silent tear that's coming down. You say, well, why did he weep? I mean, he was going to raise him. We don't know for sure. But there's probably a lot of reasons. It wasn't supposed to be this way, was it? How many Old Testament saints had Jesus see die that were not supposed to die? All but two of them, right? All but Enoch and Elijah. Everyone else, Joseph, Abraham, Moses, David, the man after God's, all of them had died. It's not how it was supposed to be. He's grieved because of the consequences of sin. The wages of sin is what? Death. He says this is not how it's supposed to be. That's one of the things that he's probably thinking there. He's probably feeling for Mary and Martha. They're going through this thing. The death of their brother, that's a big thing. They were close. So he feels a little bit for them, but if you want my opinion, I don't know the mind of Jesus, and the Word doesn't tell us this. There's a much deeper thing going on, right? Because Jesus is standing here, and he's standing in front of a tomb, and he knows that in just a couple of weeks, his body is going to be the one in the tomb. He knows that to get to that point, he's going to be arrested. He knows that to get to that point, he's going to be humiliated. He knows that he's going to be beaten. And he knows that he's going to be crucified. He knows, even worst of all, that the wrath of God is going to be put upon the man who knew no sin. And all of the sin of everybody is going to be placed upon him. And his Father's not going to be able to look at that. He knows all of this is about to happen. Lazarus' resurrection was a gift of grace, but it's not a gift of free grace. Jesus paid the price for it. We'll see Easter Sunday when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane. He sweat like drops of blood. That's how concerned. We think, well, Jesus, he's God. No, he struggled. He is flesh. He didn't want to die. Do any of us want to die? No, he didn't want to die. He didn't want to go to the cross. In fact, when he's praying, he says, if there's any other way. But he says, nevertheless, not my will, but your will. And he knows he's going through all of this. Verse 38. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor. If you have the King James Version, it says, his body will stinketh. And that's a cool translation. For he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." In other words, I'm just praying this prayer so these people hear. You already know that I know, but I'm saying it for their benefit. That's what he's saying here. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." There comes a point in every miracle where Jesus rolls away the stone and he shows you what he's done. 4 days had passed. They were in the midst of grief, but he rolls this stone away, and here comes this mummy out of the tomb. And he's not walking like we think because his feet would have been bound. He's actually hopping like an Easter bunny. He's hopping out of this grave. Why? Because he's still bound. He's bound in his grave clothes. Lazarus comes out, his face is wrapped with a cloth. He's bound from head to foot. He's alive. He's breathing behind that cloth. He's been called out of the grave. He's escaped death. But here he is still bound from head to toe. He's alive, but he couldn't go anywhere. He couldn't do anything because he's bound from head to foot. We don't think about that. But you ever seen the Scooby-Doo episode where they have mummies? You ever seen like Tutankhamun or something when they remove the sarcophagus and they're bound? They're bound head to foot, and that's what this was. He's all completely bound. His legs are together. His arms are up here. Everything is bound. He's still in his grave clothes. He has little movement. He can't walk. He's got to hop everywhere. There are so many Christians that live just like that picture of Lazarus. God has done a miracle in their life. God has made them alive. God has touched them. God has changed them. God has brought them from death back into life, and yet they're still living like they're dead. They're still in their grave clothes. They're stinky. They're restricted. The movement is just not there. You say, what are you talking about? I'm talking about when God brings us out of something, when He saves us, and we go right back to that. And so we're addicted to something. We're addicted to drugs or marijuana. You know, it's legal now. Well, that doesn't mean that Jesus likes marijuana. Just because it's legal doesn't mean that it's spiritual, right? And so you know, man, it's just Jesus saved me. He delivered me from that, but, you know, it's just a little doobie. Is that what that was the 70s. I don't know what they call it in the 2020s. It's just a little toke. And what happened? You're just binding yourself right back up. Jesus said, unbind him. Get him out of this. Unrestrict him. They're putting themselves right back in it. You see it all the time. People are so bound up. They can't hear the voice of Jesus. They can't move anywhere farther than just hopping along in little spurts. It's because they bound themselves back in the grave clothes. And we see that happen constantly. Jesus said, loose him, let him go, unwrap him. Verse 45, many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Wait a minute. This guy's been dead 4 days. Not everybody believed? Nope. Well, seeing is believing. Well, believing apparently isn't seeing. I love it when people say, when Jesus was here, you know, he talked about how your faith can move a mountain from one point to the other. What if he would have just done that? What if he would have just said, hey, mountain right there, you move over. Everybody would have believed in him. No, they wouldn't. Because you had somebody who's been dead 4 days. That tomb, you know he's dead. When they rolled that stone away, you could smell he was dead. And then Jesus says, come out. And here they didn't believe. Not everybody's going to believe. They saw this awesome miracle. They experienced his life-changing power. But they're not responding. Verse 47 says, so the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, what are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. That's key. You had a group of people who were threatened by Jesus. Oh, he does some awesome things. He's healed some people that I can't believe how he healed them. There's no other way other than that was him. There's no way to fake that. He's great. He performs many signs. He performs many wonders. His message is fantastic. Boy, he's a great teacher. But if Jesus isn't stopped, they're saying, the Romans will come and take our place and our nation. The emphasis is on our. Our. In other words, they're worried the Romans are going to come and take these things away from them. They're less worried about the well-being of the nation than they are their own possessions and all of their own power. That's what they're worried about here. And we see it more in the next verse. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish. Now Caiaphas is appealing to his own self-interest himself. He's saying, it's better to just put one person to death than the whole country suffer. He knows that they want to hold on to their privileges, to their ranks. He knows they want to hang on to their possessions, the economic benefits their positions bring. He knows all that. He says, think of what's best for you. And they do, and they agree. Okay, I guess we got to put him to death. Wouldn't be best for the blind, wouldn't be best for the leprous, wouldn't be best for the deaf or somebody who's dead, but it'd be best for these religious folks. Why? Because he threatened them. He threatened their position. They loved all of those things. They loved their position. They loved their power. And Jesus came in and he threatened that all that might be taken away. He himself didn't threaten it, but his actions threatened that Rome would come in and just take the ironic thing is that's what happened, isn't it? I mean, you had that later happen in 70 AD. Here comes Rome. And it's a result of this moment. It's a result of the crucifixion of Christ that happened. Listen, people don't just behave in ways to displease God. You don't just say, well, God doesn't like this. No, you do it because you like it. You sin because you like sin. Whether you admit to it or not, you love it. The Word tells us that, does it? It says we will be lovers of ourselves. How many times does it say that? Over and over and over. Man loves sin and doesn't want to abandon them. And then Jesus comes in and he says, I'm going to wipe you clean. I'm going to make you whole. And that's a threat. And so some people will give a little bit of their heart to Jesus. You can have this, but you can't have this. This is off limits. Because they're threatened that he's going to take it away. The Word says they are lovers of themselves, lovers of pleasure, or the last chapter of the Bible says lovers of falsehood. Here's the ironic thing about what Caiaphas is saying. He doesn't know he's saying it. The Lord, the next verse says, is prophesying through him. But he's thinking we either get rid of Jesus or Rome will get rid of us. That's what he's meaning when he says this. In other words, it's better to kill just one man than have Rome destroy us. That's what his intent is. What he doesn't realize is that Jesus is the one person who can take away all of the sin of the whole nation. And not just that nation, but also the Gentiles. And He could take away the sin of you and of me 2,000 years later. He doesn't realize it when he's saying that, but verse 51 said He did not say this of His own accord, but being high priest that year, He prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So from that day on, they made plans to put Him to death. That starts our cold case. From that day on, they made plans to put Him to death. The only way Jesus could interrupt the funeral of Lazarus was to start His own funeral. And He did it. He gave up His life for those that He loved. That's what He did for you, and that's what He did for me. They came together. They said, what are we going to do with Him? They said, this person who just gave life, his life needs to be taken. The life giver needs to die. John Connie, would you come? He didn't have to go raise Lazarus. You understand that? Nothing said He had to perform this miracle. He did it because He loved them and because He loved us. He knew these events would be set in place. And He loved them and He loves us so much that He said, it doesn't matter if it's my life. I'm going to give it. He later said this, greater love hath no man than this, than he would lay down his life for a friend. And that's what He did. Would you stand with me? Three categories of people in this passage. There are three categories of people in this room today. There are people who have seen the awesome power and miracles and wonders that Jesus does, and they've accepted that, and they've accepted Him. And they're living full. There are people who have seen the power of Jesus. They've seen the miracles. They've experienced that life-changing power. They've seen it in other people, but they rejected Him. We're going to go tell these religious people that's how these Pentecostals act over here. You have those kinds of people. But then you have some that are kind of in between. They're religious, but they're threatened by Jesus. It's like, you can have this, but not this. Or God, I don't want you to change me this. I want you to change me a little bit, but I don't want to be one of these people way over here. God, I don't want to be one of those people are nuts. God, I'll let you put me here, but I'm not going to let you put me here. You're threatened by Him. He's going to disrupt something in your life. You're going to lose friends if He puts you way over there. People aren't going to talk to you. People aren't going to want to associate with you. They're going to dislike. They're going to put the mad face on your Facebook comments instead of the thumbs up or the heart. And people worry about that. We'll give Him all this, but we won't give Him that. You're living like Lazarus. Give Him everything.